DN. Imagine waking up before the sun, not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the rooster's crow. Your day isn't dictated by a 9-to-5 schedule, but by the rising and setting of the sun. This was the reality for most Americans before the 1800s. Life was overwhelmingly rural. An endless cycle of planting and harvesting, with everything from your clothes to your candles made by hand, right in your own home or community. It was a world of quiet, localized existence. But then, something shifted. A wave of change, quiet at first, then a roaring tide, began to sweep across the nation. This was the Industrial Revolution, and it didn't just change how America worked. It completely rewired the DNA of daily life forever. Let's travel back to that pre-industrial world for a moment. Picture a family farm. The father and sons are out in the fields. The mother and daughters are spinning wool into yarn, churning butter, and preserving food for the winter. News travels slowly, by horseback or by letter, taking weeks to cross states. The goods you own are few, and most are heirlooms, passed down through generations because they were built to last. Your world is small, centered around your family, your church, and your village. You know everyone, and everyone knows you. Life has a predictable rhythm, a stability tied directly to the land you live on. It sounds peaceful, almost idyllic, but it was also a life of immense physical labor and vulnerability. A single failed harvest could mean starvation. Sickness could be a death sentence without modern medicine. Then came the steam engine, the spinning jenny, the power loom. These weren't just clunky pieces of metal. They were seeds of a revolution. Entrepreneurs, visionaries, and sometimes ruthless businessmen saw an opportunity. They started building factories, first in New England, powered by the rushing rivers, and then, with the advent of coal-powered steam, everywhere. These factories could produce textiles, tools, and goods at a speed and scale that was previously unimaginable. A single factory could churn out more cloth in a day than 100 women could spin in a month. And this is where the Great Migration begins. Not across oceans, but from the countryside to the city. The promise of a steady wage, a life not dependent on the whims of weather, was an irresistible pull for thousands of young men and women. They left the farms in droves, flocking to burgeoning cities like New York, Boston, and a rapidly growing Chicago. They traded the open fields and fresh air for crowded streets and the constant hum of machinery. Life in these new industrial cities was a shock to the system. The very concept of time changed. On the farm, time was fluid, governed by seasons. In the factory, time was money, literally. The factory whistle replaced the rooster's crow. Your day was now divided into rigid, 12 or 14-hour shifts. You didn't work at your own pace. You worked at the pace of the machine. The work was grueling, repetitive, and often dangerous. There were no safety regulations, no weekends off, no paid vacation. The air was thick with smoke from coal furnaces, and the noise inside the factories was deafening. Housing couldn't keep up with the explosive population growth. Families were crammed into poorly built tenement buildings, often with no running water, sanitation, or proper ventilation. Disease, which had always been a threat, now spread like wildfire through these dense, unsanitary neighborhoods. Cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis were common. For many, the dream of a better life in the city quickly turned into a daily struggle for survival. But it wasn't all grim. The Industrial Revolution also brought about incredible advancements that we take for granted today. For the first time, mass-produced goods became affordable for the average person. Suddenly, you could buy a clock to hang on your wall, manufactured dishes for your table, and clothes made from fabric you didn't have to weave yourself. This created a new consumer culture. The general store, and later the department store, became a central feature of urban life, a palace of material wonders. People began to define themselves not just by what they did, but by what they owned. The world also got a whole lot smaller and faster. The railroad was a true game changer. It stitched the vast American continent together with iron tracks. A journey that once took months by wagon could now be completed in a matter of days. Mail could be delivered with astonishing speed, connecting families and businesses across thousands of miles. The telegraph, a marvel of its time, allowed for near-instantaneous communication. A message could be sent from New York to San Francisco in minutes. This interconnectedness fueled commerce, spread ideas, and fostered a sense of a unified national identity that hadn't been possible before. The structure of the American family also underwent a profound transformation. On the farm, the family was an economic unit. Everyone worked together towards a common goal of survival. In the city, this changed. Men typically went out to work in the factories or offices, becoming the primary breadwinners. This created a new ideal of domesticity, where the home became a haven in a heartless world, and women were expected to be the keepers of this domestic sphere. The concept of the housewife and the breadwinner, these are direct products of the Industrial Revolution's separation of work and home. Of course, children weren't spared. On the farm, children's labor was part of life, helping with chores suited to their age. But in the factories and mines, children were exploited mercilessly. Their small hands were ideal for fixing jammed machinery, and their small statures were useful in tight coal mine tunnels. They worked the same long, brutal hours as adults for a fraction of the pay. The horrific conditions for child laborers eventually sparked outrage and led to one of the first major social reform movements, fighting for laws to protect children and mandate education. The revolution didn't just build factories, it built a new social order. A new, powerful class of industrialists and financiers emerged. The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts amassing fortunes that were previously unimaginable. At the same time, a massive industrial working class was formed, with a shared experience of labor and struggle. This tension between capital and labor gave birth to the union movement. As workers began to organize and fight for better wages, safer conditions, and the 80-hour day, the strikes, riots, and political battles of this era laid the groundwork for the labor rights we have today. So, when you look around at our modern world, at the device you're watching this on, the clothes you're wearing, the food in your fridge that came from halfway across the country, the very idea of a 5-day work week, you're looking at the legacy of the Industrial Revolution. It was a period of incredible innovation and progress, but also of immense hardship and exploitation. It tore apart an old way of life and forged a new one in the fires of industry. It was loud, chaotic, and often brutal, but it catapulted the United States onto the world stage and created the blueprint for the society we live in. It was the messy, complicated, and world-changing process that turned a nation of farmers into a modern industrial superpower. The echoes of that factory whistle from 200 years ago can still be heard today. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey back in time fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about how our world came to be. See you in the next one.